Guys, Roland here. Today is a special day for many reasons. For one, you can see it's the introduction of our new show, the Remember Who You Are show. And I will be having an amazing conversation today with a guest you are already familiar with. We will be talking about Dr. David Hawkins's levels of consciousness. This will be an in-depth review. I think it's a fascinating topic that you will find valuable. So right after this intro, we will get to it. The prime directive for every human is to know thyself, which is not a discovery, it's a remembering. And that's the goal for this show, to help you remember who you are. I am your host, Roland Achenjang. Guys, welcome to the Remember Who You Are show. I am your host, Roland Achenjang, and with me today is, like I said, a guest you are already familiar with, here to talk to us about Dr. David Hawkins's levels of consciousness. I'm speaking about none other than my good friend, mentor, goes by the Energy Doctor and host of the Quantum Effect on Gaia, Randy Veitenheimer. Randy, how are you?
I'm doing great. Great to see you again. All right.
You too, Randy. It's been a hot minute. It's been a hot minute since we got together to record a conversation, and I'm glad we're doing this again.
Yes. Always look forward to these. I find them entertaining. So I hope everybody else does too.
And educational, right? Entertaining and educational, of course.
Definitely educational, right?
Yeah. One thing I do want to say, and I told you this before we started recording, is just to express how dapper you look. And I appreciate that. That's awesome.
Well, thank you. You get a chance to present yourself to the universe. I teach it very simply to businesses, and it's actually just 4 or 5 things. And number one is look good. So it's actually be good, do good, look good, feel good. And you can mix those 4 up any which way you want. But if you feel good, you tend to look good. That's what it amounts to.
Absolutely.
And what's interesting is feelings, emotions become a primary part of the beginning of power versus force on the map of consciousness, because most of those emotions deal with what we call under 200 level consciousness. So
look at you already getting into the conversation.
So looking good becomes a part of it. If you don't feel good, look good, and then you'll feel good. Or if you do good, you'll feel good. You see this?
Yeah.
We call those portals to yourself. They're windows into yourself, right?
Absolutely. And, like I said, these shows are not only entertaining, they're also educational. And one of the big reasons I made the change was so that people understood exactly what the show was about. Like, I wanted it to hit them right on the nose. It's a show with conversations on amazing topics with amazing guests to help you remember who you are. And with simple anecdotes like that, do good, look good, you're going to feel good. Like it's so simple and trivial, but it works. It does work. Yeah. And I mean, we could not have had a better intro than that after a long hiatus. And so we'll tap into this conversation about Dr. David Hawkins's work. And I want to thank you because you introduced me to his work, and I had the chance to read it. I've actually read it twice now. Also in preparation for this conversation, I read it again. But one thing I do know is that you spent some time working with him, actually, and learning with him. And so please tell us who in your mind was Dr. David Hawkins, and what did you pick up from working with him during the time that you guys spent together?
That's a phenomenal experience that occurred. I'll put it that way. We look at people and we see a shell, we'll call it. We'll see a form, but we don't see their function real well. I mean, sometimes you do. The clothing or something may cause you to recognize, oh, they're a carpenter or something, a chef, whatever, because there's specific uniforms for different trades. But when you get to spirituality and consciousness, jeans and t-shirts all the way up to robes and turbans, we'll call it. So that's that looking good. And so when you look at that, number one, the book we're discussing is called Power versus Force. And I call that a portal to understanding consciousness. And it's a big doorway, okay? It lays the groundwork for coming to any kind of understanding of your emotions or your thinking or any kind of concepts like spirituality and God and consciousness. And so I think it was 2000, 2001, somewhere in there, David gave his first lecture. There's a backstory to that I'm going to do December 10th in Sedona, Arizona at the Creative Life Center where he lectured. And everybody's invited to come to that. But when you walk in the room, here's this guy that's like, 5'3" or something. And I hope that's accurate. But you had no idea what you were dealing with. Okay. It's kind of like in martial arts. I have, 40 years of martial arts. You don't know who you're dealing with when you look at a person, because you just see the form and you don't see the functionality at all. Mm-hmm. And some of the people I've been most scared of is like Bong Soo-han, probably 5'3" or so. Some of my Aikido instructors, some of my Kung Fu instructors, they were not necessarily big people, okay? But boy, you should have been afraid. And that's interesting because you don't think of approaching something like spirituality or consciousness and being afraid of it. And that's called naivety. Spiritual naivety is not knowing, we'll call it the change that's going to occur as opposed to the damage that's going to occur to all your preset or pre-held programming and ideas and ways of doing things, we'll call it. So to walk in that room and see David, you're like, well, okay, here's this guy up there, small stature. And by the way, his nickname for me was the big guy. And for some reason, he loved taking pictures of me and him together because he's like smaller than me, we'll put it. Right? And anyway, he just thought that was hilarious. So what's interesting in that first lecture, you walk in and it's like, there's something different going on from the music that was being played to set the mood or vibration. And then my favorite quote is the openings of the program. It was his first lecture after Power versus Force had come out on this subject. And he said, if you have any closely held beliefs, religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, if you have a definite idea of the way the universe is, you should probably leave right now.
He didn't want to have any back and forth with anybody.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like, well, that's an interesting way to start a conversation, and it's true, because the exposure to knowledge, especially spiritual truth, will tend to make a change in you. Okay, mm-hmm. And if you're going to hold on to one point of observation of the universe, you're going to be shocked, you're going to be surprised, and you're going to be probably have an emotional response to it. Right?
Oh, of course. Now, just randomly, Randy, do you feel that somebody would have felt that he was taking a position where he knew what those answers were, and that he believes in knowing where is sort of the right one, and would challenge and maybe expand your consciousness in a way, and that what he knew, like I said, what he knew was the right one.
Yes, because what he was saying is very simply is you need to be open to what I'm getting ready to tell you. What's interesting is I've taught Kundalini Yoga for about 40 years, and we had a kind of an unsaid thing when we taught certain classes, okay? And the unsaid thing was that if you take this class or do these exercises, you will not be the same person at the end of it, okay? And even to the point, like in the Tantra classes, sometimes 3 days, sometimes longer, the profound change in your own consciousness means that when you step back out into the world, literally, you're a different person. You may, and we would tell people, I mean, among ourselves, you may not be married to the same person. You may not have the same job. You may not live in the same place. I mean, it's like all this stuff. And we were at a class in Austin, Texas, I think it was 30 years ago or something. And the lady who's teaching was a friend. I'd known her for 20 years or something. And she actually stood up and said that, right?
Yeah.
If you take this class, you may not have. And I went up after her, I said, we never told people that. So transformational consciousness is not something to be taken lightly. It's not something like that. And so I think his opening statement was to the effect that you will be changed. And one of the great things, at one point they said I was the biggest seller of Power versus Force, like they could track where the books were being sold. Because I told everybody I met, you have to read this book. And so that's how it started. He stood up and said that, and then he goes, we're going to go through these things. And so I went to, over 8 years, about 58 different lectures with him, and was able to have conversations and discussions. We'll call that points of disagreement. But we always had a good time. I mean, you have to have a sense of humor about this, and Dr. Hawkins had a tremendous sense of humor about the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So
how did he? Okay. No, thank you for that. And from my perspective, I'm always going to wonder how he started into this work. Did he ever share that information with you?
Yes. Particularly in the early lectures, he would talk about how he got there, right? And so everybody has experiences that they may not take the time to put them into a framework to actually examine their progress in life, okay? We can think about things that bother us when we're younger that no longer bother us, right? Things that we did that were maybe unhealthy, and we just don't do them anymore. And so that's a true evolution of consciousness that occurs. The idea being that you would, in some way, promote your own well-being, and of course we can do that a million different ways. But one of them is to have a framework to examine maybe yourself and the world, and some techniques to do that, applied kinesiology. And so out of that, the map of consciousness became exactly that, a map, a roadmap, something that you could go into, look at, and then over the course of the 14 books he wrote, find ways to help yourself, improve yourself, expand yourself, and be able to do the same for others. So.
Absolutely. And, this is a good time to explain, at least in my point of view, that this information is really one way to make sense of the reality that we are experiencing. And there are many other ones that are available to you. And one that comes readily to mind would be Maslow's hierarchy of needs or something like that.
Right.
Or the 8 densities of human evolution or soul evolution or something
Right.
like that,
Right.
right? Like we're always all coming up with some framework that allows us to operate in this environment where we continue to expand our consciousness and we continue to also grow personally and take care of our well-being. And so that's what this strikes me as. And what's also unique about this, and maybe you can even speak to this, is that Dr. David Hawkins tapped into this knowledge after going through some sort of what I would term a spiritually transformative experience.
Yes.
Can you
Yeah.
speak to this a little bit more?
Oh yeah. Yeah. um, one of the things, the way I explain what you're talking about is anything can become a portal, a mirror. We talked about earlier. The universe acts as a mirror, and the trick there is we want a good mirror. We don't want a funhouse mirror. That's what I call it. Been to a carnival, right?
Yeah.
And some person or a place or the entire universe can act as that mirror, and it's a difference of scale. That's the way we look at it. So the idea that power versus force, or Dr. Hawkins himself, act as a portal to a change in consciousness. Well, you can pick up a comic book and come up with the same thing. It's kind of like whatever is proximate, call it reality, what's in your area or in your field or what's available to you. So all over the world, there's always an opportunity to learn, even if you're in the middle of nowhere. The plants, the environment will teach you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what it'll do is teach you about yourself. And so I like Dr. David Hawkins' works because I resonate with it. And of course, I have no ego, just so you know. And that's one of my jokes.
I was going to say, who is Randy Veitenheimer?
In one of the lectures, I walked up there and said, "Look, I think it was the first one or second one. Second one, I go, look, how already you know all this." So there's an ego. And but I said, I am eternally grateful for you for putting it into a framework where I can understand it and use it as a template to be able to organize and interact in personal relationships and business. Like, this has tremendous business applications. And so he just looked at me and cocked an eyebrow, you know. But it's true. We all have been through experiences that had the potential to elevate consciousness or give us insights. I think like Celestine Prophecy dealt with having an insight. An insight is just that you finally connect to some intuitive knowledge of kind of like the way the world works, or the universe, or you or yourself. And those insights and those experiences are available to anybody. It doesn't make any difference what position you are in society, and what society for that matter. So in that aspect, we are all truly equal. The difference is a portal for some, Dr. David Hawkins. For others, just pick spiritual teachers. I've tried to sit with or meet hundreds of them over the years. And each of them had what I call a specific insight, a specific area. But Dr. Hawkins took on the whole show. He took on an effort to explain the whole thing. Like the framework would be expanding out as much as you could put in it, or as much as you could explore it. So
Absolutely.
in that aspect, we're all explorers, and that's the way I teach it. We're all explorers, and we're all looking for a portal. And once we find a portal, we go into that cave or into that area of knowledge. And once we acquire that and assimilate it to some degree, we're never satisfied. We always keep exploring. So that's why 14 books, like, you keep expanding out on what you can learn. The other thing, like the experiences you have, near-death experiences, NDEs, sometimes produce the fastest change, okay? The good things actually rarely produce a change in consciousness. And I didn't
No.
design the world, but there you go. We
Yeah.
could talk a long time about that. But
Oh, well, I mean, I
yeah,
don't it's that's a great reminder. It's kind of what this show is about, right? Remember who you are. You're in a place where if you're feeling good all the time, you're probably not going to expand your consciousness very much. Um,
right,
and then also you talked about the fact that this knowledge is available, like the portals in everything that is proximate to you, and your
yeah,
experiences too. And with me, and the audience knows this, you know this, mine was meditating. That was my
right,
that
right.
was my portal, and it continues to be. But what's fascinating, Randy, is after you tap into this portal, when you come across just about any other information system, you see that same knowledge in there. It becomes your like baseline of operating,
Right,
right? And
right.
and so yeah, you could look at Dr. David Hawkins's work and say, oh yeah, of course, this resonates, this makes sense. Or any other person's work and say, oh, I see this. It's that, like you said, that innate curiosity within each one of us.
Right.
That's also very much a reflection of what the creator is. This entity that seeks to know itself infinitely, coming through and then pushing you to write 14 books on the same topic that you thought you had discovered
Right.
and knew everything about. But
Yeah.
I want to ask you this about Dr. Hawkins. When you say you were around spiritual teachers and you could maybe describe what, quote unquote, their aura was like, what was Dr. David Hawkins's aura like?
Um, when you have, let me come to that. A couple things. Your show name. Remember who you are. Okay.
Hmm.
People ask me what I do. I said I teach you what you already know. So it's kind of the same thing. You see what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yep.
And then I tell people, if you really want a shortcut to spiritual understanding, study country and Western music, because it'll teach you all this, right? So
Yeah.
those are my
Oh,
bad,
or
right?
here's one of my favorite lines from you, Randy, is get in a knife fight.
Oh yeah, no, that defines reality absolutely. People talk about absolute reality. If
Yeah.
you've never been there, you have no clue what it's like. But one of the things about power versus force very succinctly lays out the fact that every level of consciousness has a certain level of energy available to you to express. And as you progress, and he put it in a logarithmic scale, map of consciousness, the more energy, the higher you go, the more energy you have, the more energy you can utilize. Uh, in some ways, we could say the higher you go, the more you're yourself. Remember who you are,
Hmm.
and then we'd say remember to be yourself. Okay, and of course that's what I teach and what I work on and practice with people. Uh, so one of the things that when you have more energy, that energy flows up and down. In Chinese medicine, we call it Tajian pole, the spine. And energy flowing down, up and down that spine creates an electromagnetic field. In humans, it creates a bioelectromagnetic field, and that is a big difference. Okay.
Hmm.
And so people that have a big energy field, we call charismatics, we call them attractive, we call them movie stars, politicians, rich people, successful something. And it's just a sheer fact that so much energy is flowing up and down that spine or that Tajian pole that the energy field expands out beyond 9 feet. So at 9 feet, you're going to be pretty healthy. You won't get sick as often or as deeply as other people. But when you get out to 10, 20, 30, 40 feet, you're impacting everybody around you. So at a guess, I'd say that when we first walked in, he was having about a 50-foot energy field. So there were 26 people in that first class, and I was one of them. And within a couple of classes, it was sold out for years in advance for 400 people, like you couldn't get in. So part of that is more people came in, the bigger David's field would get, because you have to like as a Kundalini yoga teacher, you have to offset the energy of the group that's facing you. It's one of
Mm-hmm.
those things they don't teach,
Mm-hmm.
or people don't realize is that, Mick Jagger has to sit up there and offset 100,000 people. And if you look at just this strict energy flows involved, look how many speakers and how loud and how much amplification is required to offset the 100,000 people staring at you in a stadium, right?
Yeah.
And so in a Kundalini yoga class, as a teacher, you're required to offset that. And that requires that you have more energy flow through you. And if you have what we call flaws in the system, in your consciousness, then you're going to suffer, and the students are not going to derive as much benefit as they could. And David did that. The amount of energy flowing through him was phenomenal, and everybody there experienced it, even to the point when I walked in. It's been 22 years later that you can still feel that in the room at the Creative Life Center in Sedona, Arizona. So,
Wow. Yeah. And
yeah,
let's take this moment just to make a shameless plug, right? You
yeah,
you mentioned it earlier during our
yeah,
conversation, but I don't think people might have grasped it. Um, Later at December 10th, 2022,
right.
you're going to be back
Sedona,
in.
Arizona,
Yep.
right. Sedona Creative Life Center is where all this started. And when I went in, it's like I was just shocked at the place because I spent so much time there, like going home. And immediately I had the thought, I'll do Power versus Force Revisited. I will do a lecture, and I will explain how I got there, and explain a little bit about Power versus Force, and then actually how you utilize this. And I'm going to describe the future of Power versus Force. And so everybody's invited to come to that. Now, I know it's a tremendous expense because I did it for 58 different times, and it takes some planning because it's expensive, to travel and hotels and everything. Of course, Sedona is now very popular and much more busy than it was when I was there. So, but I hope to do a recording of it, and we'll make that available to people too. So, okay.
I hope you do, Randy. I
Yeah.
hope you do.
So that just kind of came to me when I walked in the place, and I said, I'm going to do this. So I just signed up and signed all the papers, and I look forward to doing it because it'll be a lot of fun. Okay. So.
Of course. You should try to make it into a special. Like you said, recording it. I don't know. Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
revisit that
Yeah,
outside
yeah.
of this. But so going back to this, topic of conversation, Dr. David Hawkins says in his map of consciousness, there is absolutely no way we can move forward without talking about how he was able to calibrate this information. In a sense, how he was able to validate, if you will, that these levels of consciousness ended at the logarithmic scales that he assigned to them. And so he employed kinesiology. And when I was reading the book, I was like, this is fascinating. I tried to do it on myself a couple of times, and my mind got too much into the way. And I'm like, I'm just going to stick to meditating. That works for me. But would you mind talking a little bit about kinesiology as a practice or a tool to help you answer questions or validate information?
Yes. We all seek information. If we described human beings, we'd say we were seekers. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the tool we use is curiosity. So there, right? And we know what happened to the cat. So
R.I.P.
So David studied and became a psychiatrist. Actually, I went to school to be a psychiatrist. I worked in the state mental hospital to pay for my way through school, and I was studying medicine, and basically was kicked out of OU med school for asking too many questions at the time.
What else did you do, Randy?
I mean, well, it's like I kept asking questions, and I got tired of the interruption. Said, "You need to leave." That's a quote. And so rather than stop, I switched over and started studying Chinese medicine. So that I just flipped over and kept on going. But one of the things that occurred, you're seeking knowledge, but you have no way to discern the truth. And this is probably the biggest thing required for kinesiology. And David translated out, and I did too, as being neutral. If you can't be neutral, your ego is going to supply the answer because you want to be right. And under 200 level consciousness always has an ego component that says, I want to be right about things, not about being truthful necessarily. Okay. And so when we look at that, David was rocking along in his practice and somehow, somewhere came across kinesiology, muscle testing. And I employ and developed a much more, not necessarily advanced, but faster way to do that. I don't need to go for a muscle response. I can go directly to a field response. And so that's kind of the progress I've made. But when he discovered it, he started applying it like to his clients. And the way we learned, and I'm probably the way he learned, it was like you hold a medicine on your chest or solar plexus and have somebody do test the strength of your arm, right? If you hold it out to the side. There's a lot of different techniques. Dr. Sally St. John 20 years ago taught different classes on it. A lot of people did. Monroe Institute, I couldn't go through all the names, right? So when he discovered that, he, excuse me, he set up Institute for Spiritual Advancement, or Study of Spiritual Advancement. Let's see, what did he call it? Institute of Advanced Spiritual Research. Okay. So when he did that, I thought, well, that's really interesting. So I set up Foundation for Quantum Research in Medicine and Health. And I was exploring what I call in some ways a practical aspect, medicine and health. He was applying to spirituality. I didn't have that thought. So spirituality covers medicine and health. It covers everything. Mm-hmm. So, and as you advance up the chart, you will find that that's true. So when David started talking about kinesiology and stuff, I was like, remember I said I already know all this stuff? No ego, no ego. Yeah. In the late 70s, I was in California. I'm in California today. And I went to I actually saw a little article in a paper, a little advertisement. And the advertisement was the Philosophical Roundtable will be meeting at 7 p.m. at a Silomar room so-and-so in Monterey, California. And I looked at that ad, it's just a little bitty ad in the local paper. And I went, I'm going to that. So I went out and knocked on the door. The guy answers the door and looks at me and goes, what do you want? I said, I'm here for the meeting. Right? And he goes, well, you can't come in, basically. And Jessica was the lady who was heading it, older lady at that time, because I was younger. And she opened the door, looked at me, took one look and go, get in here. So I was invited in.
Yeah.
And what actually started all of it was the fact that during those 3 days, it was all the top psychics on the West Coast. And it was strictly a meeting for them. They were public, not invited. On the fourth day, though, we would open it to the public, and each of those psychics and healers and spiritual people and whatever would work on people for free. Okay. And so in the course of those 3 days, they would do like speaker events. They would have people come up and talk about their particular way of doing things or how they handle things and this, that, and the other. And they would teach us like energy work and then applied kinesiology. Here we go. Marcel Vogel, not his real name, by the way, last name, he took his wife's name, nom de plume, pen name, and a man named Peter Tompkins, and they wrote a book called Secret Life of Plants. Okay. And Secret Life of Plants, when it came out in the 70s, was the first idea that plants actually have feelings. Here we go, map of consciousness, and they actually express themselves. In other words, they communicate. And so Marcel Vogel would stand up and demonstrate, like you could put a cigarette, say, at the center of your chest, or you could put medicine or a plant and determine if it was good for you or not, because you would have a strong or weak response to it. Okay. So I actually started studying kinesiology, applied kinesiology, back in the early 70s. And boy, if you don't think that was a voodoo subject,
back then,
I mean, people just freak out. To this day, they freak out about it.
of
And
course.
the crazy part is, here it is 40 years later, and like, oh yeah, we teach it at colleges and universities now.
Yeah.
And
It's
I'm
the
like,
it's the evolution of consciousness, Randy. I
yeah.
mean,
And I'm like, you still don't have any idea the extent of what that reveals. And what happens is, and just like when I use it tremendously or a lot in my practices with working with people, is all information is available to you. All of any person's information, any person on the planet. And I tell them, you give me a first name, I'll tell you everything about them. So, because nothing's hidden. And even David referred to it as the hidden determinants of human behavior. I think that's a subtitle to the book, Power versus Force. And then the trick is nothing's hidden, and we can test for the truth of it. And testing for the truth of it is applied kinesiology or kinesiology. It's the idea that there's a positive and a negative. There's also a neutral, by the way. And a neutral means that information is not available, right? Maybe to you, or maybe now, might be available later. But, and then when I expanded on that, I looked at people like Einstein and Tesla and different people over the centuries, and they all tapped into knowledge that was already there. It calls them to question the idea that something came out of nowhere. And this is my research. I kind of developed a GPS system for the field, is what I call it. So,
yeah. No, to add to that real quick, Randy, and sorry to cut you short and apologize to anyone who is, but you're right. When people, at least with me, when I tapped into a certain amount of this consciousness awareness, what I immediately recognized was I wasn't discovering anything new. I was remembering, right?
Exactly.
And that's the name of the show. Remember who you are show. And it talks about knowing thyself is in a discovery. That's our tagline. It's a remembering. And so you're just remembering that sort of, kinesiology is a tool that you can use to tap into this infinite knowledge that's already there. But one thing too that you mentioned was information that may not be available to you right now, which may show up as neutral, right? Future events is one thing in reading the book that seem to keep coming up as inquiries that would not give you a yes or no answer in a way. And I found that, sorry, go ahead.
Well, just that one thing is that once you go into the future, you're dealing with potential. In other words, the event hadn't occurred. And that's a critical component of it. When we say things, anything, we could say there's a level of truth to it, say 10, 20, 30, 40, 50%, 100%, never 100. So two things come in. If I say it's going to rain tomorrow, I'm describing the potential. Like, and we do that on the news, 10% chance, 90% chance. Why? We're describing the future. And if we look at Heisenberg uncertainty principle in physics, we say that you can be 99% sure, but there's a 1% chance of the unknown involving itself in human affairs, is the way I'll put it. So even though you can say, I will be at work tomorrow, and you can say that 99% chance you'll be there. There's 1% chance that the asteroid will hit, the aliens will land. I mean,
Not the asteroid.
yeah. Oh my God. uh,
Yeah.
so, so when you understand that, then you can be confident, but also open to the fact that the universe works in a way not entirely of your um, own desire or whatever. Okay.
It's not going to entirely bend to your will,
To
essentially.
your will, yes.
Yeah.
And to not acknowledge that is to not acknowledge the chaotic or the uncertainty, and they call it an uncertainty principle,
Hmm.
and that has to be configured into what you're doing. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't momentum. Like I teach it as a martial art. There's momentum moving you in certain directions. And back to the classes that I used to teach, each of those may move you in a different direction and cause you to abandon the old direction. And one of the things about power versus force and the map of consciousness is that each level of consciousness is not static. It's kind of like you're present in it to some degree, some greater, some lesser. But each of them represents like a field of knowledge that you tend to be moving through. You tend to not be stuck. A lot of people talk about that.
Yeah.
And so you're not stuck at any level, at the level of addiction, at the level of apathy. I'm talking negatives now.
Hmm.
Uh, but even at the level of joyfulness and happiness, most people can't maintain it. It's a very hard thing. It doesn't mean we can't experience it. So
Yeah. No, that brings up a good point. It actually was one topic I wanted us to discuss, which you've really summarized it very well. I was going to ask, in reading through these, I looked at myself and I felt, well, I jumped through during instances, moments of experiences. Like when I had my awakening, I was all the way up, but I also knew that I could not sustain that. I mean, after a week, I felt like I was too happy to function on this planet, you know,
right.
and ever since then, I've really wondered what it's like to always be at, that level of very intense joy or unconditional love all the time. I mean, everything made me happy. And I was just like, I can't, nothing made me sad. My computer was God, my mouse was God, my keys were God. Everything, I was just this too happy to function
It's
person.
it's interesting. It's interesting that when you start down through all this or start into all this, um, one of the things when you progress into that state, the over 500, on Hawkins scale 540 level of joyfulness, is that you go through a process of crying. It's everything is beautiful. You can look at a flower, you can hear a song, you can look at a person and literally break down crying. It's not a psychotic break. It is a break from what we would determine as the consciousness of reality up to that point. And beyond that, you're beyond the intellect, you're beyond thinking, even beyond feeling at a certain level, and you're totally in what we call an experiential dimension.
Yeah.
And it can rest. It can take days or weeks or months or a year to get over. But everybody I've ever taught through that has experienced that.
Absolutely.
This uncontrollable expression of joy at the pure existence of either yourself or things around you or people around you or just life itself. And if there
Yeah.
was any outcome to power versus force, that is one of them that I would suggest is available to anybody that reads it. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, Randy, you're so correct. I have a video animation that I made describing the moment around when I had my awakening and what the maybe 3 to 5 minutes of that event was like for me. And then I go into more detail in my book, who you are, all you need to remember. But the whole transcending that reality for me, that really caused me to sob and cry uncontrollably was feeling like I had just gotten the fact that I was the butt to the best cosmic joke ever, that my rational thinking was what created reality, or that my rational thinking was everything. Once you transcend that, you see that it's just this limited, very dense way of viewing reality. And once once I was over it, I go, what a I fell for it. That's how I felt. I fell for this again. I fell for this again. This is all a joke. And I was laughing and crying, and I felt like, oh, okay, you guys got me. You know, you, whoever you are, the creator, you, good job, kudos. And so that was my experience, transcending that reality and just laughing and crying uncontrollably. I can't help it.
No,
Yeah.
you can't. It's a different quality of energy and
Hmm.
consciousness, and that's flowing through you at that point, and it alters you forever.
It does.
I tell once you do this, you can't go back. Right?
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it literally becomes painful to go backwards. Right? And I'm sure there's a country Western song that says,
Randy, you
right?
need to start telling people that if they want to understand life, they should just listen to rap music and see what kind of reaction you
Oh,
get
same
from
thing.
that. Yeah.
Same thing.
um, but you know, what I do want to say this when you talk about once you reach this higher level of consciousness, even though you may not be quote unquote operating at that same level, just that awareness, like I believe it's really, really enough to change you. Um,
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
Well, it's transformative, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's actually now we say there may actually be an epigenetic change, that you may actually, the changes and experience you have be able to influence your dream structure to the point you pass it on to,
Mm.
and so that becomes tremendous in the fact that sheer consciousness is altering form, in this
Mhm.
case your genetic structure, and the information loading on the genes. um, it's one of my little pet things is that transcendence is a better form of explanation than ascension. Okay,
Mhm.
ascension has an implication to me of you just kind of like skipping grades in school. Okay,
Mhm.
and transcendence is you move through them. You move through them and gather that experience and knowledge that comes from every level of consciousness. Everybody's been mad. Everybody's been sad.
Mhm.
Everybody's felt guilt and shame. These are all programs and levels of consciousness. The trick is to not stay there. Uh, Even joyfulness and love and things like that. Everybody goes, love is the answer. I love
What
that.
what kind of
Well,
love are we talking, right?
yeah, well, love is 500, as Dr. Hawkins explained it. It's unconditional love.
Mhm.
It's the it's the a cat purring. It's a bird singing.
Mhm.
It's a flower just by its presence, and each of those is enough to make you cry from a pure love and above, right?
Mhm.
Uh, Understanding, and and what's interesting is the intellect only operates up to the point of love. We all know that, right? Rational thought goes out the window, and so to go beyond it though is to get into knowingness, and knowingness as a level of consciousness and a level of interaction in the universe is tremendously more truthful than love itself. It's 1,000 times better than just the intellect,
Mhm.
1,000,000 times better than the feelings. And each of those could be like an hour-long talk because
Talk.
of how that all works. So
Yeah.
when they say love is the answer, they're I think Bon Jovi wrote a song. We're halfway there, because 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 the conscious scale is from 1 to 1,000, and whatever's at the bottom, and then God's at the top is kind of what he laid it out.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting. Love's at 500, and like people like Einstein and stuff weren't able to advance beyond the intellect. $4.99.
Mm-hmm.
And yet when you step over that line, it's kind of like your mother loves you. You absolutely know that. You didn't think that. You didn't have to arrive at some equation. You didn't, you know what I mean? It's a knowingness that it applies the same thing as knowing your first name. And I call that a internet marker, only it's a field marker. And all your information is contained behind that first name, kind of like a big data portfolio. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
even more fascinating, Randy, is this level of 500, which is halfway there, is not the conditional love that we're all used to. It's not that at all. Okay, I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah.
Here we are. We're almost at an hour, honestly, and we haven't even started going through the levels the way we envisioned. But whoever is listening, this is a good base foundation for the subsequent conversations. And one other thing I want to talk about before we even get to the levels is one of the points Dr. Hawkins discusses in his book, which has to do with the population or the number of people that find themselves primarily expressing a certain level of consciousness, right? And basically, it's like a flipped, or it's like a pyramid where there are more people on the bottom, and then it gets smaller and smaller, and there are very few people percentage-wise at the top. And I wanted to ask you, because to me, it's fascinating when you think about all of life always being in balance, and how that relates to that. Like, you just need maybe one person to be at a level of 540 versus 2 billion people below 200 or something like that, and all of that energy is balanced. And you kind of alluded to this earlier when you were talking about holding Kundalini classes and having to balance everyone else's energy, or Mick Jagger in a concert. But can you add to that again, and why that's fascinating?
Yes. What he's talking about is one person can offset. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We don't realize how much we're collective consciousness that we participate. Collective consciousness is participation without consciousness. Okay. You abandon your own consciousness for the collective. And if anybody wants to explore that, all you got to do is look at the last 2 years of history, right? 2019, 2021, 3 years. And you look at that. So to have individual consciousness, we'd say like, what's the language? Debbie Downer and Karen's, and we're just talking negative mental or negative emotional states. And you can take, and humans are this way. You can take 50 happy people, or I'll use 26 happy people, and put one unhappy person in there, and they'll all start resonating with the unhappy people. It's like there's a meme about Einstein writes down 1 to 100 on a blackboard, but he messes up one of the numbers or leaves it out. And 400 students go, "Hey, you messed up," and nobody said you got 99% right.
Right? Yeah.
So, you think about that. It's like, okay, so if I put one happy person in 26 unhappy people, they'll kill it. Like, you can't be happy here. What the heck are you doing, right?
Yeah, of course.
But that one happy person is there to let you know that happiness exists. That's the key. Now, as you advance, remember, the higher consciousness you go, the more energy is available to you, the bigger the information field or energy field. The bigger the energy field, the more expansive, the more influential, and the more influential causes more change. So you actually can drop one person into a large group. And if they're sufficient conscious, they will change the whole group, right? Mm-hmm. In an elevated way, or sideways, or downward, okay? And I could give dozens of examples.
Or backwards,
Yeah. But one of my favorites, just got a second, is I was at a 3-day tantric course in San Francisco, and Yogi Bhajan was teaching. And one of the techniques we were learning is to get out of pain, right? Mm-hmm. Sata Nama meditation. Now, I can run more than one track of information at the time. It's just thing. And so we were doing this meditation, and it had a mantra chant that was going along. And we were in a sauna, a physical position that was horrible, painful. Well, you're supposed to transcend pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't ascend from pain, you transcend pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go through it. And we teach that in martial arts. But I was having a hard time. So I started cheating. So while I was doing the one chant, I started running Satanama meditation as an undercurrent, right?
Mm-hmm.
To get rid of the pain. And Yogi Bhajan stopped 400 and something people from meditating, said stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he turned around and looked at me and goes, don't do that. So, and I went, whoops, because
how could he tell?
I was changed. That one person was changing the vibration or the consciousness of the whole freaking group, right?
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
That's how much, you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And one aspect of human consciousness is that it takes 25 or 6 positives to outweigh one negative thought. And if you think about that as one negative person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you think about, golly, I need to meditate over the last 3 years to escape collective consciousness that's being negative out there.
Yeah.
Right? Because life is beautiful, right? So
it is beautiful. And we kind of talked about this earlier about the almost necessity of negativity in this environment as a means to grow and transform, right? So it makes sense that it's part of our reality here. The other thing I want to talk about, where you say you don't really transcend these lower levels or all these levels of consciousness, is you go through them. And in going through them, you're going to learn lessons that you can now sort of have within your arsenal as tools to reach into, to express in what you might determine as an appropriate setting to sort of move forward with your goal. And I found that very fascinating, because there's sometimes when you can use anger to get what you need, but also recognize like it's a conscious choice to express this emotion at this point of time. Or and then what's even more fascinating is when you have an opportunity to feel sad, you're not, like you said, going to be stuck in there anymore. You're going to say, oh, I felt this and I know what this is. And I have tools where I can transcend this by whether it's slapping myself so that I get angry and go to the next level, something like that. But now it's a knowledge, it's a knowing that you have aware of yourself. And then another fascinating thing is, like you said, this is just a trove of information to help you make sense of this reality, that when you find yourself in any one of these places, you don't feel like you're failing at being a human. It's part of, yeah.
One of the Chinese concepts is, and Japanese is the idea of a fully developed person. Okay. Now, Yogananda came up with it as a self-realization. So I'm in Encinitas, right next to his center, Yogananda's center. Self-realization. Well, self-realization also is being able to examine the whole of human consciousness and human being and human existence and human expression and all those things. And like I said, I'm eternally grateful to Dr. Hawkins for putting it in a format that I could understand and utilize as a way to benefit myself and others. So benefit humanity. So, and it's phenomenal, the number of people that I work on or work with, they transcend all levels of consciousness. And yet every one of them, I tell them, read this book because it gives us a commonality of language. And that was one of the things about halfway through the courses with David, I walked up to him and said, I'm going to use your book in my classes. And he immediately said, for a commonality of language. He was highly intuitive. It's like that knowledge was there of what I was doing and why I was doing it. And he goes, like, do it, right? Mm-hmm. Because it can only help. And that's one of the things we can say about the study of Dr. Hawkins' work. It can only help. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Randy, we had a plan, and it was a probability.
Yeah.
And there was a 1% chance that it would not
Yeah.
turn out the way we planned it. And of course,
Yeah.
it hasn't. But this is beautiful. I think the entire conversation we've had is a really good setup for our future conversations, where we now spend some time talking
Right.
about each level of consciousness on this map. And so, as always, Randy, I appreciate you coming, sharing your stories, making us laugh, making me laugh for sure. Yeah.
I tell you, I have a great time, and I love this subject, obviously,
Mhm.
and more to say. So more to come. Everybody, tune in next time. Right. So
Yeah. And guys, if you're watching and you like this new show format, or if you like the conversations we've been having, by all means, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It helps us grow. And share this video with friends and family members that you think need to expand their consciousness, or at least at a minimum, remember who they truly are. And so, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Randy.
you're welcome. Thank you.